Jake Thompson has always loved playing basketball. Even now, when heavy raindrops were pounding on the asphalt, the 16-year-old couldn't tear himself away from his favorite game. The old basketball court behind Oak Grove School was his refuge, a place where he could forget about all his problems. That night, Jake stayed up late practicing his shots. Dark clouds hung over the city, and the streetlights cast a dim light on the wet asphalt. Jake knew his mom would be worried, but he couldn't bring himself to go home. Suddenly, a bright bolt of lightning cut through the sky, momentarily illuminating everything around him with a blinding light. Jake flinched and dropped the ball from his hands. When he turned to pick it up, he froze in his tracks. A huge dark figure stood on the opposite side of the court. "Who is it?" Jake shouted, trying to hide the tremor in his voice. The creature stepped forward, emerging from the darkness. It was a giant monster, like a living shadow with glowing red eyes. It was taller than a basketball backboard and seemed to be made of black smoke. "Jake Thompson!" The monster growled in a low voice that gave the boy goosebumps. "I've been watching you. You like basketball, don't you?" Jake nodded, unable to say a word. "Then let's play," the monster snapped. "For your life." "What does that mean?" Jake whispered. "The rules are simple," the monster replied. "If you win, you live. If you lose, I take your soul." Jake wanted to run away, but his legs wouldn't let him. He realized he had no choice. "What if I refuse to play?" he asked in a trembling voice. "Then I'll just take your soul right now," the monster laughed. "At least that way you have a chance." Jake realized he was trapped. He took a deep breath and nodded. "Okay, I agree." The game began. Jake played like never before in his life. His every move had been honed by years of training, but the shadow was incredibly fast and strong. With each monster ball he scored, Jake felt the life drain out of him. The score was almost even. Jake could feel the fatigue gripping his body, but he kept fighting. He couldn't afford to lose. There were 10 seconds left in the game. The score was 99-98 in favor of the monster. Jake had one last chance. He drove the ball to the hoop, dodging the huge arms of the shadow. Time was running out. Jake jumped, preparing to shoot. Suddenly, he felt something cold grab his leg. The shadow pulled him down, and Jake fell to the asphalt. The ball slipped from his hands and rolled away. "Time's up!" the monster's voice thundered. "You have lost!" Jake felt a coldness envelop his body. He tried to scream but couldn't make a sound. The last thing he saw were blazing red eyes approaching in the darkness. Sarah Johnson has always been cautious. The 23-year-old medical student knew the dangers of the city at night and usually avoided late-night travel. But that night she had no choice. Her anatomy exam had gone late into the night, and she had to get home at almost midnight. The rain was pouring down, turning the streets of Boston into dark rivers. Sarah stood under the university's canopy, shivering from the cold. She opened the taxi app and ordered a car. A few minutes later, an old yellow sedan pulled up. Sarah quickly got into the back seat, enjoying the warmth of the cabin. "Good night," she said, giving her address. "Sorry to call you so late." "That's okay, dear," replied a female voice from the front. "I love night rides." Something in that voice made Sarah shudder. She looked ahead and froze. In the rearview mirror was a pale face with huge black eyes that seemed to stare right into her soul. But the most striking thing was the driver's neck. It was unnaturally long and thin, almost like a giraffe's. Sarah felt her heart start to beat frantically. She tried to calm down, convincing herself that it was just fatigue after a long day. The car moved, and Sarah tried to focus on the road outside the window, but something was wrong. They were taking the wrong route. "I'm sorry," Sarah said, trying to hide the tremor in her voice, "but I think we're going the wrong way." The driver did not answer. Instead, her head slowly turned 180 degrees, looking directly at Sarah. Its mouth stretched in an unnatural smile, revealing rows of sharp teeth. Sarah screamed and ran for the door, but it was blocked. A long, pale hand reached out to her, fingers like claws. "Don't be afraid, dear," the driver hissed. "I just want to get to know you better, much, much closer." Sarah fumbled desperately for something to defend herself with. Her hand felt for the heavy anatomy textbook in her bag. Without thinking, she grabbed the book and hit the creature over the head with it. The driver screamed in an inhuman voice, and the car spun on the wet road. Sarah kept hitting the creature with the book, desperately trying to get out. Suddenly, the car crashed into a lamppost. Sarah hit her head on the seat and lost consciousness for a moment. When she came to, she saw that the door was open. Rain was pouring in, but the driver was nowhere to be seen. With trembling hands, Sarah got out of the car and ran away without looking back. She ran until she saw a convenience store. Running inside, Sarah begged for the police. When officers arrived, they found an abandoned taxi near a lamppost, but there was no sign of the driver. The only evidence of what had happened was a torn driver's license in the name of Elizabeth Bates, dated 1920. The police wrote off Sarah's story as a shock after the accident, but she knew the truth, and every time she saw a taxi at night, her heart sank with fear. Because somewhere there in the darkness, a pale woman with a long neck was waiting for a new ride. Michael Forrester has always loved the outdoors. As an experienced forester and wildlife photographer, he has spent most of his life in the woods. This time, he went on a 3-day expedition into the depths of Olympic National Park to photograph rare birds. The first 2 days were great. Michael made some impressive shots and enjoyed the tranquility of the wilderness. But on the 3rd day, everything went wrong. The morning began with a thick fog that enveloped the forest, making it difficult to navigate. Michael decided to climb to a small plateau, hoping that the fog would be less dense there. However, as he climbed, he realized he was lost. "Damn it," Michael muttered as he looked at the map and the GPS, which for some reason was showing only an error. He tried to determine his location by the sun, but thick clouds covered the sky. Hours passed, and Michael still couldn't find the right way. The forest around him was getting denser and darker. The trees here were old, covered with a thick layer of moss, their branches intertwined, forming a dense canopy overhead. As the sun began to set, Michael realized that he would have to spend the night in the forest. He started looking for a place to camp when he suddenly noticed something strange. There were cobwebs on the trees around him, but not an ordinary one. These threads were as thick as a finger and seemed incredibly strong. Michael had never seen anything like it. Curious, he came closer to take a picture of the unusual phenomenon. Suddenly he heard a strange sound, as if something large was moving among the trees. Michael froze, listening. It was completely silent. But the feeling that he was being watched did not leave him. Slowly turning around, he saw it. Between the trees, about 20 meters away, was a huge spider. It was the size of a car, with a black furry body and 8 huge sparkling eyes that seemed to glow in the twilight. Michael felt his heart stop for a moment. He slowly raised the camera and took a picture, unable to believe his eyes. The camera flash seemed to enrage the creature. The spider made an eerie sound and started moving toward Michael at an incredible speed. The instinct of self-preservation took over. Michael started running, not even thinking where he was going. He could hear the creature chasing him, jumping from tree to tree with a thunderous crash. Michael's heart was racing as he ran through the forest, leaping over fallen trunks and pushing through bushes. But the spider was faster. With each passing second, the sound of its approach grew louder. Suddenly, Michael saw a cave ahead. Without hesitation, he rushed to it, hoping that the narrow entrance would stop the monster. Running into the cave, Michael realized his mistake. Everything inside was tangled in a thick web. He tried to turn around, but it was too late. The entrance to the cave was already covered in cobwebs. Michael tried desperately to break through the sticky threads, but the more he struggled, the more he got entangled. His flashlight illuminated the walls of the cave, and he saw dozens of cocoons hanging around. He was horrified to realize that some of them had human silhouettes in them. A huge shadow appeared at the entrance to the cave. Michael turned and saw a spider squeezing in, its 8 eyes gleaming in the darkness. "Please," Michael whispered, even though he knew his words were foolish. "Please don't." The spider came closer, its huge jaws open. The last thing Michael saw was the flash of his camera taking the final picture. A week later, a search party found Michael's backpack at the entrance to the cave. Inside, they found his camera. The last picture showed a huge spider hanging over the photographer. But Michael himself was never found. Since then, there have been rumors of a giant spider living in the depths of Olympic National Park. Rangers warn tourists not to go too deep into the forest, especially when the sun starts to set. Because somewhere out there, in the darkness, a predator is waiting, ready to lure a new victim into its net.